Hello there folks, welcome back to another marvelous anime video. Vampires have been a huge part of film and popular media for a very long time now. The idea of immortals that stalk the night for blood and prey has held a morbid fascination amongst people for centuries. Over the years, through literature and other forms of popular media, their depiction has varied from shining effeminate men to grotesque bestial monsters and everything in between. Kouta Hirano's Hellsing offers a more traditional depiction, one that's rooted in Bram Stoker's iconic novel Dracula. However, unlike in the book, where Van Helsing kills Dracula, in Hirano's version, he's instead subjugated and made the Hellsing family's enforcer for perpetuity. Dracula goes by the name Alucard in this timeline, which is an anagram for his real name, and fights supernatural threats under the Hellsing organization. The entire series is extremely graphic in terms of its themes and is intended for a much more mature audience than regular anime. It's a visceral journey into the darkest corners of the human psyche, blending supernatural violence with deeply unsettling imagery. Set in a world overrun by vampires, ghouls, and fanatical factions, the series doesn't shy away from showcasing the grotesque and the morally ambiguous. Whether it's the haunting brutality of Alucard's battles, the inhumane atrocities of Millennium, or the religious zealotry of the Iscariot organization, Hellsing consistently pushes the boundaries of psychological and physical horror. In today's video, we bring to you 10 of the most disturbing moments and aspects of the series. It should be noted that we're not presenting them in chronological order, so without further ado, join us as we navigate this gruesome world where monsters fight monsters and humanity pays the price. We're ready to begin, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we do have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Jan Valentine's Bloody Rampage. The Valentine brothers are two of the earliest vampires we're introduced to in the series. They belong to the villainous group Millennium, who return as the primary antagonists of the series in Hellsing Ultimate after not being featured in the first anime adaptation. While we will be talking about both Valentine brothers in this video, let's start with Jan Valentine, the more sadistic and deranged of the two. The Valentines lead an assault on Hellsing Manor in what can only be described as one of the bloodiest massacres that we witnessed in the series, largely thanks to Jan's psychotic rampage. They arrive disguised as tourists at the manor's gate and open fire on the guards with their army of ghouls, reducing the men to mists of blood. The two then enter the mansion, after which they split up, with Luke Valentine moving away to find Alucard in order to duel him. What follows is carnage incarnate as Jan dismembers and disembowels the bodies of countless guardsmen in the most shockingly violent manner. There are heads flying everywhere and guts spilled all over the corridors, what can only be described as an orgy of violence. The security room scene during this assault is particularly disturbing, as it features Jan obscenely threatening Integra Hellsing while tossing the head of a decapitated security guard like a ball. He licks this severed head and continues to mutilate it, all the while in the background, his ghouls are shown eating the bodies of the other security personnel. There's zero censorship or holding back in the scene as the bodies pile up and the dead men rise up to join the ranks of the ghouls. Jan Valentine is portrayed as this ultimate psychopath who seems to derive some sort of sexual thrill from all of the violence and mutilation. This is further reinforced when he threatens Integra with necrophilia as he continues to murder his way to her location. Even when he's subdued and killed, his final actions are laced with profanity as he shows the middle finger to Integra before turning to ash. This is the first time we see the members of Hellsing face a real threat. What makes all of this highly disturbing, beyond the violence and gore, is that Jan is not just an ordinary evil villain, he's an extremely cruel person who derives pleasure from the heinous acts he commits, treating the carnage he creates like a party. This irredeemable character leads the first ever massacre that we witness in the series, which really leaves a deep impression on the audience regarding what's in store for the rest of the series and the nature of the threat the Millennium poses. Luke Valentine gets devoured. While his brother's on a rampage, destroying Hellsing Manor, Luke makes his way towards the dungeons to find Alucard. Unlike his brother Jan, who's more of a rabid dog, Luke considers himself to be more refined and elegant. He considers himself to be a true vampire of the new age and considers Alucard a relic of the past. Confident in his abilities, which had been granted to him artificially through Millennium's experimentation, he wants to duel Alucard to prove that he's the superior of the two once and for all. However, little does he realize, until it's too late, he's walked right into the lion's den. Luke begins to taunt Alucard and show off with his amazing speed, avoiding all the attacks directed at him, laughing overconfidence. He zips around the room, exchanging gunshots with Alucard, even managing to shoot his target back a few times, including what seems to be a fatal shot to the head. His confidence is quickly shattered when he realizes that Alucard has allowed himself to be shot on purpose as the Nosferatu king begins to heal rapidly. Alucard coldly asks him why he was dodging bullets when he could simply regenerate as a Nosferatu thought. Excited to have an opponent who might finally provide him with some entertainment, Alucard releases the seals on his power. He shoots Luke Valentine's legs, completely tearing them from his body. Alucard begins asking Luke to show him his true powers, repeatedly telling him to regenerate the lost leg, summon his familiars, turn into mist. However, by this time, Luke realizes that Alucard was a monster far beyond his comprehension. All of his earlier bravado and confidence leave his body as he begins to scamper away from Alucard, terrified, calling him a monster. Disappointed with Luke for having turned out to be yet another pretender, Alucard looks upon him with disgust and unleashes his familiar that devours the Millennium Vampire's body, while Valentine thrashes and cries in agony as he's eaten alive. If Jan proved just how unhinged and dangerous Millennium was, Alucard's destruction of Luke balanced the scales by showing how he too was on another level. The sheer nonchalance and brutality with which he dispatches a vampire like Luke, who was undoubtedly super strong, shows just how disturbingly powerful Alucard really is. However, the most disturbing part has to be the fact that Alucard lets Luke live long enough to realize his folly and suffer both psychologically and physically. Sarah's Victoria's traumatic past. Zoran Blitz, one of the artificially created vampires of Millennium, like the Valentine brothers, attacks Hellsing Manor, believing that without Alucard to protect the place, it was ripe for the picking. She encounters Ceres instead, and the Wild Geese mercenaries, who are able to do very little to stop her rampage. Zoran's main power lies in her ability to psychologically torment her victims by creating illusions and making them relive traumatic moments from their past. Like most Millennium members, she shows absolute disregard for her foes, treating them as mere fodder to fuel her penchant for violence and cruelty. We know that Ceres was turned into a vampire by Alucard when he protected her from a lecherous vampire who was molesting her, but we hadn't yet found out about her true background. This episode reveals the truth about her past. It turns out to be much more sordid than one would imagine. Through Zoran's manipulation, we see that Ceres had only been a little girl when her home was assaulted by a group of armed individuals. Sensing the danger, her mother had hidden her in a cupboard from where she had watched these men shoot her father dead, after which they proceeded to sexually assault her mother before killing her as well. Ceres had been forced to watch the whole while, having to stifle her screams of horror in order to not get caught. Quite honestly, sexual assault scenes, even if they're merely implied, are disturbing. The fact that a child had to witness that happening to their mother is even more so. What follows is a strong retribution that turns into yet another disturbing moment in the series, which we'll talk about next. Zoran Blitz's brutal annihilation. As Zoran begins her assault on Integra Manor, she manages to put the Wild Geese mercenaries under her illusion. This allows the SS forces to sweep the building, slaughtering more than half of the mercenaries. By the time Ceres is able to break them out of their mental prisons, the damage has been done. Only a handful of men remain. However, when her primary weapon runs out of ammo, Ceres is forced to confront Zoran in hand-to-hand combat, which she gets heavily outmatched, losing her arm in brutal fashion before being tortured mentally. The leader of the Wild Geese, Pip, manages to rescue Ceres, but at the cost of his life when Zoran mercilessly slaughters him. Pip had shared a good rapport with Ceres, constantly teasing her in a good-natured manner. There was also a hint of romance between the two, which made his death all the more unbearable and tragic. Seeing his lifeless body, the usually cheerful Ceres loses complete control for the first time. She drinks his blood, transforming herself into a true vampire. Such is Ceres's ferocity and aura. After this, the battle-hardened SS troopers, who were all vampires as well, begin to visibly sweat and quake in their boots. Her revenge on Zoran is simple yet disturbingly brutal, as she grabs the female vampire by her head and slams her head into the floor, crushing it steadily. In an effort to escape this predicament, Zoran begins to punch Ceres' head in desperation, only to have it ripped off and spat aside. Ceres then proceeds to smash Zoran's head and grind it against the wall, killing her in a slow and painful manner. Her victory over Zoran, while disturbing, has much larger implications for her character arc. By crushing Zoran's skull to bits, Ceres overcomes her both physically and mentally. It symbolizes her reclaiming power through trauma and pain, as Ceres confronts her past and overcomes it, becoming stronger in the process. In this way, we see how the Hellsing series utilizes violence not just for shock value, but also to push much deeper narratives, elevate the story further. The dark implication of Walter turning traitor. From the start of the series, we had seen Walter fulfill the role of not just Integra's bodyguard, but also her guardian. He was more than just a servant, he was a father figure to her after her parents had died. Even though he was an old man, Walter was still a deadly fighter who utilized custom razor-sharp strings as if they were an extension of his own body to restrain and rip apart his foes. The most important thing about him, however, was the fact that he was human, and despite his advanced age, he was still lethal in combat against superhuman beings like vampires. It was therefore kind of shocking to see him appear before Alucard, having transformed himself into a vampire. As the two former allies battle each other, the action, as usual, is filled with over-the-top gore and violence. However, while this is disturbing, fans have no time to comprehend the graphic scene as they're still disturbed by Walter's betrayal. Alucard deduces that the reason Walter turned traitor was because, in his heart of hearts, the old butler had always wanted to defeat Alucard with his own hands. Having become old and gone past his prime without having accomplished that dream, Walter turned to Millennium to make him young again. According to Alucard, Walter also hated the fact that with every passing year he was becoming weaker, feared he might just become useless to Integra one day. For someone who wasn't just Integra's guardian, but also one of the organization's pillars, go about betraying everything he once stood for makes us question the very foundation of trust and loyalty. What makes it even more disturbing is the fact that Walter doesn't betray his allies due to coercion, makes the choice willing, fully aware of its implications. His choice and transformation echo the disturbing and uncomfortable truth about how even the most honorable souls aren't safe from corruption. It tells us that sometimes the desire to leave a legacy and stay relevant can become dangerous obsessions that ultimately ruin the very things you want to secure. His betrayal is personal due to his relationship with Integra and the audience, which makes it cut deeper while also making it even more disturbing at the same time. Major's war-obsessed personality. One of the most disturbing aspects of the entire series isn't any specific event, but rather the character of its overarching antagonist, simply known as the Major. His history with Alucard and the Hellsing organization goes all the way back to the Second World War. The Major was in charge of the occult division of Hitler's Third Reich, experimenting on vampires and leading them as SS troops into battle against the enemy. He would be defeated by a young Walter and Alucard towards the end of the war. However, even though the war had ended for the rest of the world, it hadn't for the man known as the Major. Through the years after the war, he had waited patient, finding his technology that allowed him to create artificial vampires, all the while studying his enemies and biding his time. After a steady build-up beginning with the attack on Hellsing Manor, he finally unleashes his dogs of war upon London, hell-bent on creating a scenario where he would revel in a never-ending conflict. What's really disturbing about the Major's character is not that he's deranged in the traditional sense. This man is very much lucid and knows exactly what he's doing. The chilling clarity with which he chases his obsession with war is extremely unsettling to witness, as there's no plausible cause to which you can attribute all the chaos he causes. Even though he openly declares his love for war, we must keep in mind he doesn't specifically love being victorious in it. The Major loves war regardless of whether he loses, wins, survives, or dies. There are no political or ideological concepts that he wishes to enforce by pursuing war. The act of war itself completely consumes him. The chaos, fire, carnage, and death that it inevitably results in. Despite being a Nazi, he shows no attachment to the Nazi ideology, meaning the entire thing is just a vehicle for him to take him to his desired destination of endless conflict. What this makes him is not just a warmonger, but an individual you can't reason with, threaten, or coerce into giving up his ways. The Major has no backup plans, no escape routes, or a desire to leave behind a legacy. For him, the way he views war is almost theatrical. It's precisely this disconnect between horror and performance that's extremely unsettling. He strips the meaning from conflict, turning it into a spectacle for enjoyment. This dehumanization of those who become caught in this war of his, regardless of being willing or unwilling participants, is grotesque and disturbing, as it's the fetishization of a horrifying event. Even his death is unsettling, as he dies with a smile, only knowing what he had caused without a shred of remorse. His entire character isn't just disturbing in its own right, it also serves to elevate just how unsettling the entire premise of the series is. The ghastly concept of ghouls. Moving to another disturbing aspect of Hellsing, which isn't an event, let's talk about how ghouls in the series are created and the role they occupy in the universe. In Hellsing, ghouls are created when low-level vampires drink the blood of humans who aren't virgins. When this happens, instead of a new vampire, they get a mindless familiar, which is a grotesque husk of its former human self. They're sick parodies of the human beings they once were, reduced to deformed, shambling horrors. One of the most disturbing aspects of this transformation into ghouls is the fact that it reduces people to mere meat puppets. They're slaves with no will, no soul, and no personality, which plays nicely into the existential fears regarding the loss of identity and agency. Unlike classic zombies, who at least don't have an overlord, these fiends aren't truly undead, but trapped in a limbo between life and death, suffering a horrible half-existence in eternal servitude to be used for meditated violence that's motivated by evil not of their choosing. Ghouls also rarely appear alone, can be directed to use conventional weapons and tactics. despite being mostly expendable cannon fodder, their sheer numbers create a sense of hopelessness and dread among their victims. In a world full of morally ambiguous characters and power hierarchies, ghouls remind us of the consequences of evil when it's allowed to spread unchecked. What makes ghouls ultimately disturbing is the fact that they embody death without peace, life stripped of will, and violence without meaning. They're the ultimate symbol of dehumanization, as these individuals are desecrated and made to commit atrocities that they otherwise would never have committed. The invasion of London. Up until this point in the story, the conflict between Millennium and the Hellsing organization had been taking place through isolated incidents. However, the invasion of London changes all of that as the Major finally unleashes all of his forces upon the English city in a blitzkrieg-style attack. Before the Hellsing organization can react, the hordes of vampires and ghouls descend upon London, turning the city into a war zone within minutes. The carnage that follows is unprecedented as vampire SS soldiers and their ghouls begin massacring innocent civilians and security personnel, frenzy of blood and gore. Entire city blocks are torched as an inferno begins to engulf London. As the situation quickly becomes untenable, Integra summons Alucard, allowing him to fight with his full power, which he happily obliges. For the first time, we get to witness Alucard in his true form, find that within his blood dwells the essence of every foe he's ever slain, and the sight of this is dreadfully spectacular. Thanks to his intervention, the tide of the battle begins to become more balanced, but this doesn't last for too long. The reason is that, sensing the Hellsing organization and the vampires would be too busy exterminating each other, leaving both sides weakened, the Vatican sends in their own forces to join the fray. Declared as the newest crusade, they deploy paladins and knights along with their Iscariot division to kill two birds with a single stone, hoping to exterminate both the Nazi vampires and the Protestants from England. While the battle ultimately ends with London almost completely destroyed, what makes it disturbing is the fact that the so-called good guys don't really claim victory, as there are massive losses on all sides. To call this a war would be a gross misrepresentation, as this is nothing but a massive. Millennium doesn't want to conquer London, they want to destroy it and desecrate its citizens. The unsettling part about all of this is how the violence on display is not about victory, but about deriving pleasure in the suffering that they sow. Led by a commander who just wants to watch the world burn, it disturbingly removes any common sense from the act, turning war into entertainment for themselves. The entire invasion is centered around one man's nihilistic obsession. The entire event is ideologically bankrupt since there's no justice or logic behind it, only death, destruction. From the corruption of religious symbolism to the unsettling amount of violence that's driven by nothing more than nihilism, Invasion of London has to be one of the most disturbing scenes in the entire series. Alucard's final form. In the previous section, we touched on how, during the invasion of London, Alucard unleashes his full power to combat Millennium. Now, let's talk about what makes the form so disturbing on so many levels. Starting on a visual level, upon releasing all the seals on his power, Alucard's physical body dissolves into an enormous sea of blood and shadow. From that infernal sea rises countless familiars created from the souls of every single human whose blood he's drained. These include victims from various wars, enemy soldiers, leaders, and innocents caught in the crossfire. We immediately understand that the reason why he fights with most of his power sealed is that it's so dangerous that even his allies risk getting caught in it. It's highly disturbing to think that his final form represents centuries of murder with restless souls trapped that have been denied any hope of redemption. What makes it further unsettling is the fact that he's quite literally a walking graveyard whose dead empower him. During the invasion, as he unleashes all his power, Alucard, one can say, stops being a vampire or even a person at that moment. He becomes the very personification of war itself, as a sea of souls moan and shriek, devouring everything in their path, adding to their ranks. It becomes apparent why the war fanatic Major would be so obsessed with Alucard as well. The horror that his final form represents isn't just physical, but metaphysical in nature. His powers violate the fundamental human hope that death brings rest, which is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of his disturbed final form. Anderson's grotesque transformation. Throughout the series, Father Anderson of the Vatican is shown as one of the only individuals who's able to keep up toe-to-toe with Alucard. Anderson is a zealot who acts as an enforcer for the Iscariot division of the Vatican, which deals with heretical, supernatural threats. It's suggested that Alucard and Anderson share a history of conflict that goes back centuries. Despite the priest's attempts to kill him, Alucard respects him and views the human as the only person capable of killing. Therefore, in their final battle, when Anderson resorts to enhance enhancing himself with an ancient relic called Helena's Nail, said related to Christ's crucifixion, Alucard is left bitterly disappointed. Anderson impales the nail into his heart, turning him into a monster composed of thorns that hyper-accelerate his regeneration at the cost of his humanity. Anderson's entire identity throughout the series is built upon his belief that monsters like Alucard must be destroyed. He's fanatically loyal to God, seeing himself as a righteous weapon of divine justice. However, Anderson's descent into becoming a monster himself subverts his entire identity. This is disturbing because he loses his moral high ground out of desperation. It shows that even the most devout can be corrupted. The fact that it's not some evil relic, but one that has its origins linked to the divine, makes his final form unsettling as it mixes body horror with religious sacrilege. The transformation is truly physically grotesque and spiritually horrifying to witness, which makes us question what divine power even means in this world full of monsters. The fact that even Alucard is disappointed, as we mentioned earlier, shows that Anderson fails not only in the eyes of God, but also in the eyes of his enemy. The moment strips away the romanticism of martyrdom. It reveals the raw, tragic core of fanaticism. A man willing to become the very thing he hates, only to fail and then beg for forgiveness he's no longer sure he deserves. Eventually, when he dies, there's no glory in it, just silence follows his fall from grace. Marvelous verdict! The Hellsing series is filled with many more disturbing moments beside the ones that we've mentioned here. The ones that we've highlighted are just the things that really stood out to us, but we'd love to hear what your most disturbing moment or aspect of the series was down in the comments. These disturbing moments in our video today, and the series as a whole, aren't just there for mere shock value, they reflect the series' core themes, such as the cost of power, the madness of blind devotion, consequences of unchecked violence. By the end, Hellsing leaves viewers not just thrilled or horrified, but unsettled, forcing them to question the very nature of good and evil. It's a series that embraces the grotesque to illuminate the darkest corners of its supernatural mythos and human nature, making it as unforgettable as it is disturbing. We hope that you enjoyed watching this video as much as we had fun making it for you. If you did, be sure to check out the rest of our channel where we post daily videos featuring all your favorite anime and manga. Also, if you enjoyed our content today, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for sticking with us to the end of this one. We hope to see you soon in the next. Until then, stay safe and stay marvelous.